"You eat too much for someone who doesn't pay rent," my daughter said. And I swear, for the first time in 78 years, I understood what people meant by seeing red. I didn't answer. I just sat there with my fork midair, staring at her, trying to remember when exactly she stopped being my little girl. The dining table was too wide. That's the first thing I thought. Too wide for a family that barely talked. Her husband, Craig, was scrolling through his phone. My teenage grandson, Blake, had his headphones in one ear. Only little Annie, my granddaughter, noticed anything was off. She glanced at me with those big, confused eyes. She didn't understand what her mother had said. Not yet. Lindsay was already halfway to the kitchen, muttering something about me leaving crumbs on the floor. The roast chicken was her usual dry mess, but I'd smiled and eaten it anyway. Like I always did. Like I'd done every week since she let me move into the mother-in-law unit behind their house 4 years ago. I finished chewing, set my napkin down, and excused myself. No one stopped me. Of course not. Outside, the cold air hit me like a truth. November in Oregon is a quiet kind of cruel. Wet, gray, and damp in a way that gets into your bones. I walked the short path back to the unit, my bad knee aching with every step. The porch light flickered overhead. She always forgot to change the bulb. Inside, I clicked on the little lamp beside my recliner and lowered myself down with a grunt. I didn't cry. I didn't even get angry. I just stared at the wall where my late husband's photograph still hung, slightly crooked from the time Annie ran into it with her scooter. I never fixed it. Maybe I liked it better that way. She said I eat too much, I told the picture. Too much, George. Can you believe it? George didn't answer, but I could almost hear his laugh, the deep, warm one that started in his chest and made everything feel okay. He'd been gone 10 years, died on a Tuesday morning, just after we paid off the farm, just after we agreed we'd never let the kids struggle like we had. So we gave. We gave and gave, sold the land, moved closer to the city, paid for Lindsay's divorce attorney, paid for Blake's speech therapy, paid the down payment on this very house, her house, as she calls it. But the deed says otherwise. She doesn't remember that part, or maybe she does and just pretends not to. George and I didn't care about names on papers. We cared about family. She was 29 and scared, trying to rebuild life with 2 small kids and a deadbeat ex. Of course we helped. That's what parents do. But that night, as I sat in my unit, listening to the rain tap against the window, I opened the drawer under the lamp. Inside was a folder I hadn't touched in 3 years. Mortgage documents, refinancing agreements, and the contract that listed me, not Lindsay, as the primary borrower. George and I had co-signed. She was never approved on her own. I took the folder out and laid the papers across my lap. My name was on every single page. It was never her house. It was ours. Still is. And I'd been paying the balance every month from my retirement fund while she carried on like I was some squatter she was tolerating out of guilt. That was the moment I decided I was done being grateful for a roof I paid for. I picked up the phone and called Mr. Halbrook, our family's old lawyer. His voice hadn't changed, still slow and deliberate, like he was reading from a script written in stone. "Leslie Appleton," he said, sounding surprised. "Haven't heard from you in years." "I need to revisit some property papers," I said calmly. "Tomorrow morning, if you can." There was a pause. "Is everything all right?" "No," I said, "but it will be." After we hung up, I sat for a while in the quiet. The kind of quiet that comes not from loneliness, but clarity. Let her say, I eat too much. By this time tomorrow, she'll remember exactly whose table she's been setting all these years. The next morning, I woke before the sun. Habit, I suppose. When you spend most of your life on a farm, the body remembers before the mind does. I sat on the edge of the bed, wrapped my shawl around my shoulders, and waited for the kettle to whistle. The sound filled the small kitchen, familiar and steady, the way few things are anymore. At 7:30 sharp, I was dressed and ready, gray slacks, navy sweater, my wedding ring still on my hand, though George was long gone. Outside, the fog hung low over the yard, curling around the bushes like a warning. I didn't bother checking if Lindsay was up. She rarely was before 9, and if she was, I had no desire to see her. The taxi dropped me off downtown, in front of the law office. Mr. Halbrook's assistant, a young woman with polite eyes and a strained smile, offered me coffee I didn't take. She led me to his office, where he rose slowly from behind a cluttered desk. Well, Leslie, he said, you haven't aged a day. You're a terrible liar, Warren. He chuckled and gestured for me to sit. I handed him the folder. He flipped through it, eyes narrowing behind his wire-rimmed glasses. Still paying this mortgage? Yes. She thinks it's hers? She does. He gave a low whistle and sat back in his chair. You co-signed, and your name's still primary. The payments come from your account? Every month. Does she contribute at all? I shook my head. He nodded slowly, then opened a drawer and pulled out a legal pad. You thinking of transferring ownership or taking action? Both, I said. But not yet. I want to set up a trust. For Annie. His brows lifted. Not for Lindsay? She'll be fine, I said. She's resourceful when she needs to be. He didn't ask more questions, just made notes and told me we could have everything drafted in a week. As I left the building, the morning chill had given way to a crisp sun. I walked to the nearby park, sat on a bench, and watched children chase each other across wet grass. I used to bring Lindsay to parks like this. She liked the swings best. She'd shriek with joy and yell, "Higher, Mama! Higher!" Back then, she needed me. It's strange how people forget that. How they forget the hands that pulled them out of the dark. Once they're standing in the light, they act like they lit the fire themselves. I returned home quietly. Annie was in the yard, sitting cross-legged in the grass with a book in her lap. She smiled when she saw me. Hi, Grandma. You look nice. Were you out? Just some errands, I said. She reached out her hand, and I took it, lowering myself beside her. Do you like living here? I asked her. She looked puzzled. Yeah, why? Just wondering. She leaned into me slightly, the way children do when they trust you without thinking. I kissed her head. That afternoon, Lindsay avoided me. Typical. When she doesn't want to face something, she pretends it doesn't exist. I knew she hadn't forgotten what she said the night before. She just assumed I'd let it slide. Again. She didn't know yet that the world was tilting. In the evening, I reheated soup in my unit and pulled out one of George's old journals. He kept them during the years we were trying to save the farm. Scribbled thoughts, business plans, memories. One entry caught my eye. Don't let them turn you into background noise. You're not wallpaper. You're the walls. George always did write like a man who built things with his hands. I pressed my palm against the page, as if to absorb a little of that certainty. Later, when it was fully dark and the kitchen lights from the main house cast long shadows on the grass, I looked out the window, Lindsay was in the living room, on the couch with Craig, sipping wine, laughing. The same couch I bought her when she moved in, though now she claimed she'd found it on sale. I didn't feel anger, just a quiet resolve. They had rewritten the story in their heads. They were the providers, the busy adults offering their aging mother a place to live, a guest house, a kindness. But it wasn't kindness. It was mine, all of it. And soon, they'd remember that in full. I started keeping notes. Not to build a case. I wasn't planning to take them to court. I just needed to see it clearly, for myself. I needed to stop pretending it was just a bad day or a moment of stress, or how things are in modern families. Tuesday morning, 8:12 a.m. Lindsay knocked once, then came in without waiting for an answer. She looked around like she expected to find something out of place. "You left your heater on all night," she said, frowning. "That's going to spike the electric bill." I nodded, said nothing. The truth was, I'd turned it off. But the unit's old wiring meant the thermostat flickered sometimes. I'd told her that last winter. She didn't listen then, either. Thursday afternoon, 2:47 p.m. Blake came in to borrow my charger. Didn't say hello. Didn't look me in the eye. When I asked if he wanted a snack, he said, "I'm not 5," and left. Saturday night, 6:13 p.m. Lindsay asked if I could watch Annie while they went to dinner. I said yes. Of course I said yes. Annie and I read books and made tea and drew silly cartoons. At 10:45 p.m., Lindsay returned, tipsy, smelling of some expensive perfume. She kissed Annie's forehead, then looked at me and said, "Thanks for being useful." Useful. I wrote that one in capital letters. There's a difference between being loved and being used. I used to think I was both. Now I wasn't so sure. The week passed slowly. Mr. Halbrook called midweek to confirm that the trust documents were in motion. Annie would inherit the house outright upon my death, with a clause to ensure Lindsay couldn't touch it without her consent. Warren had seemed pleased with the arrangement. "It's airtight," he said. "She can't contest it. Not without opening up a whole lot of uncomfortable truths." Good, I thought. Let the truths breathe for once. One evening, I found myself listening to a voicemail on my landline, one I'd saved from 3 years ago. George's voice. Not much, just a brief message before he headed to the store. "Do you want chicken or beef tonight? Call me back. Love you." Just that. But I replayed it twice. Maybe 3 times. His voice was stronger than I remembered. Or maybe I'd forgotten how steady he sounded when everything else in life felt like shifting sand. That Friday, Lindsay hosted a game night. I wasn't invited. It was one of those subtle exclusions they didn't call exclusion. Just forgetfulness. "Oh, I didn't think you'd want to come. It's mostly our friends from the office. There won't be anything for you to do." I heard them through the windows. Laughter, music, the scrape of chairs on tile. I sat in my recliner and turned the volume up on the nature documentary I'd already seen twice. I wasn't angry. I was taking notes. The next morning, I left a plate of freshly baked muffins on their porch. No note. Just something sweet. I wasn't trying to win them back. I was watching myself. I wanted to see if kindness would echo. It didn't. By the end of the day, the plate was back, empty, in my sink. No one said a word. Even Annie didn't mention them. But she did come that evening, book in hand. "Grandma," she said, curling up beside me, "can I read to you tonight?" My throat tightened. I nodded. She read slowly, tracing each word with her finger. Halfway through the story, she paused. Why do you live out here, not in the big house with us? I looked at her, 8 years old, full of questions that grown-ups avoid. I like my quiet little place, I said gently, but I used to live in bigger houses, with family. Do you miss it? I miss feeling like I belong inside, not beside. She didn't understand that fully, but she understood enough to reach for my hand and hold it until the story was over. Later that night, I lay awake, thinking of what I would say when the time came. How I would say it. Because I wouldn't yell. I wouldn't scream or accuse or beg. But I would speak, and they would hear me. There are things you forget until they show up in your hands again. That's how it was when I opened the old cedar box in the back of my closet and found the letters. George's handwriting was unmistakable. Tight, upright, a little too neat for a man who worked with his hands. These weren't love letters, not exactly. They were more like messages we used to leave each other around the house. On the fridge, the bathroom mirror, tucked into coat pockets. But he kept them, folded, stacked, dated. One read, "Called the bank, mortgage clear. We own this patch of dirt outright, darlin'. Feels like a miracle." Dated June 12th, 2003. Another, "Don't let her steamroll you just because she talks fast. You're not made of paper." That one was about Lindsay. She was 16 at the time. Even then, she had a way of wearing people down with speed and certainty until they folded just to catch a breath. I sat on the floor of the closet and read through the whole stack. Some of them were mundane, reminders to buy milk or notes about doctor appointments. But they all had the same tone: partnership. George never talked down to me, never made me feel small. We shared everything, even when there wasn't much to share. I found the final letter behind the stack, sealed in an envelope marked "in case." I knew what that meant. In case I go first. I unfolded it with shaking hands. "Leslie, if you're reading this, I'm not around to remind you who you are. So I'll write it down instead. You are the reason we have anything. You are the one who got us through every hard season. You are not a burden, not an extra, not an afterthought. You are the foundation. If Lindsay forgets that, remind her. If the world tries to convince you otherwise, ignore it. You don't owe anyone your silence. You don't owe them smallness. Stand up, even if it shakes. I'll be proud of you always. G." I didn't cry. Not then. I folded the letter back up and placed it in my pocket. I wanted it close. I wanted to carry those words into whatever came next. That afternoon, I made a pie. Apple, the way Annie liked it, with the cinnamon folded right into the crust. I left it to cool on the windowsill. It was more for me than anyone else. A reminder that I could still create something sweet. Lindsay came by later with a stack of mail, dropped it on the counter without looking at me. "There's something from your doctor," she said. "Might be a bill." I nodded. She lingered, pretending to check her phone. I waited. Then came the line she always used when she wanted something, but didn't want to say it straight. "Craig and I were thinking, since you're already here and not working, maybe you could help with a few extra things. Groceries, utilities, just until the new year." My fork froze in midair. She was asking for money again, just like that. After telling me I ate too much. I finished chewing, then wiped my mouth. "Did you know the mortgage payment comes from my account?" I asked calmly. She blinked. "What?" "The house? I've been paying it." She laughed, short, nervous. "What are you talking about, Mom? That mortgage was settled years ago." I stood slowly, and walked to the drawer by the sink, pulled out the folder and handed it to her. She flipped through it, page by page. Her expression shifted. Confusion, disbelief, something else. Something harder to name. "This doesn't make sense," she said. "It makes perfect sense," I replied. "You couldn't qualify on your own. George and I signed. I've kept paying it ever since. The house is mine, Lindsay. You've been living here because I let you." She dropped the papers on the table. "That's ridiculous." "It's reality." She stared at me for a long moment, then turned and left without a word. Left the papers, the mail, the truth sitting on the table between us. But the truth doesn't need her permission to exist. And for the first time in a long time, I felt tall. Not because I'd won anything, but because I'd stopped pretending I had nothing to stand on. It was almost laughable how quiet the house became after that. No more knocks on my door at odd hours. No more casual requests or passing comments about the heater or the trash bins or the so-called shared fridge space. It was as if the walls themselves had been told to keep their distance. Lindsay didn't bring it up again. Not a word about the documents. Not a mention of the folder she'd left behind. But something had changed in her walk. Tight, clipped steps, like someone trying to hold their shape under pressure. Craig was the same, just more polite, which coming from him meant a slight nod and no eye contact. They were calculating, waiting. I wasn't. I already knew my next move. Monday morning, I returned to Mr. Halbrook's office to finalize the documents. The trust for Annie was in place. The deed transfer was signed. The amendment to my will had been notarized. Annie would inherit the house when I passed. No one else would touch it. Lindsay wouldn't be able to sell it, rent it, borrow against it, or even step foot inside without Annie's written consent. It would all be legal, locked, and binding. It wasn't revenge. I wasn't out to punish anyone. I was just reclaiming what was mine and choosing, with precision, who would receive the one thing I had left to give. Halbrook handed me the copies and asked if I wanted them sent to my daughter. "No," I said. "She'll find out soon enough." Walking home, I passed the corner lot where an old bookstore used to be. It had turned into a Pilates studio sometime last year. The sign out front read, "Find your core." I smiled. Maybe I had. At home, I brewed a fresh pot of tea and sat by the window. The garden outside was starting to brown with winter, but the last of the autumn leaves clung stubbornly to the maple tree. Annie said it looked like the tree was thinking about something. She had a poet's heart, that child, too tender for a house like this. By afternoon, Annie came to visit. She did that often now, without prompt, without permission, just wandered in, barefoot on the path, book in hand. "Grandma," she said, climbing onto the armchair beside me, "did Mommy make you sad?" Children know. No one teaches them, but they know. "No, sweetheart," I said. "Mommy didn't make me anything. I'm just doing some thinking." She leaned her head against my arm. "You're going to live here forever, right?" The words struck deeper than I expected. I looked down at her. "What makes you ask that?" "Because I like it when you're here. It makes the house feel softer." Out of the mouths of babes. That night, as I folded laundry in my little kitchenette, I heard raised voices through the wall. Not loud enough to catch every word, but enough to understand the rhythm of argument. Craig. Angry. Lindsay. Defensive. "She tricked us." "It's not tricking if it's hers." "I thought you said she signed it over." "I didn't think she'd ever use it." I folded a towel, then another. Let them fight. Let them try to peel away the shock like wallpaper. The facts wouldn't budge. The next morning, Lindsay appeared on my porch, dressed too neatly for a regular Tuesday. Her lipstick was a little too bright, her smile too careful. "Can we talk?" she asked. I stepped aside and let her in. She sat at the table like it was an interview. I poured tea for both of us. She didn't touch hers. "I think we got off on the wrong foot," she said. I waited. "I didn't realize how much you were still involved with the mortgage. I thought we had agreed it was my responsibility now." "You assumed," I said gently. She flinched. "I just mean, it's confusing, Mom. You're living here rent-free and paying the mortgage. Well, now I see that. But there's a way to handle things, you know? Talking, discussing." "Like calling someone a burden at dinner?" I asked. "Is that the way?" Her jaw tightened. "Listen," she said, leaning in. "We're all a little stressed. Things are tight. Craig's job is up in the air, and Blake's tuition. I'm not your safety net, Lindsay. You're my mother." "Yes," I said, "and I taught you better than this." She looked at me, eyes wide. For a second, just a second, I saw my little girl again, the one who used to fall asleep holding my pinky finger. But then it was gone. I stood and opened the drawer where the documents now lived. I placed them on the table in front of her. "This house," I said, "is mine. It will be Annie's one day. Not yours. Not Craig's. And if you don't want to live under that truth, you're free to make other arrangements." Her mouth opened, closed. I poured more tea. Sat down. "You said I eat too much," I said quietly. "But maybe I've just been swallowing too much for too long." And this time, she had no answer. She didn't slam the door when she left. That would have meant she was angry, and anger meant fire. Fire meant life. But she wasn't angry. She was cornered. Lindsay hated losing control. I watched her walk across the yard, stiff-backed and fast, like her heels might snap under the weight of it all. She didn't turn around. I didn't expect her to. The silence after she left felt heavy, but not empty. It was the kind of silence that settles after a storm. Not peace exactly, but clean ground. Room to breathe. That evening, Annie came by again. No knock, just a soft tap of her fingers on the screen door. "You busy?" she asked. "Never for you," I said, and opened the door. She had her sketch pad with her this time, a few pencils, and a look on her face like she was carrying something too big for her age. I didn't ask. I just made us tea. She started drawing. I started knitting. And after a while, she spoke. "Mom and Dad are fighting a lot," she said without looking up. I nodded. I figured. "They keep saying stuff about the house, about you. It's confusing." "What do they say?" She hesitated. "That you tricked them. That you're being selfish?" I paused mid-stitch. "Do you think I'm selfish, sweetheart?" She looked at me then. Really looked. "No," she said. "You're the only one who listens." That was enough. She stayed a while longer, drew a picture of our maple tree and titled it, "Stubborn Leaves." I kissed her goodnight and tucked the drawing into my journal. The next day, Craig approached me. He knocked. He never knocked. I opened the door and found him standing awkwardly, arms crossed, expression stuck somewhere between apology and resentment. "Can we talk?" I stepped outside but didn't invite him in. That was new. He noticed. He cleared his throat. "Lindsay's upset. She feels blindsided." "I imagine she does." "She says you're cutting her out of everything." That this house is all we have. It's all I have, I corrected him. You've had it. He sighed. Look, I'm not here to fight. I just think we need to be practical. Maybe there's a middle ground. There isn't. He blinked. Excuse me? I've paid for this house for 18 years. I've covered every mortgage payment, every repair, every tax bill. Lindsay doesn't own it. Neither do you. She's known that deep down. She just never thought I'd use it. He shook his head. This isn't how families operate. Then maybe this isn't a family, I said simply, because I've been operated on for years. He opened his mouth again, but I raised a hand. Craig, I'm done being used. If Lindsay wants to talk to me, not at me, not around me, but to me, I'm here. Until then, you both need to understand that the story's changed. The roles have shifted. Annie's just a kid, he snapped. You think she can manage a house if something happens to you? I think she's got more heart than both of you put together. He stared at me, jaw clenched, hands curling into fists. But I didn't flinch. I was past flinching. Finally, he stepped back, muttering something I didn't catch. Probably for the best. When he was gone, I sat on the porch for a long time. The light was changing. Sunset, softening the sky into oranges and blues. My tea had gone cold, but I held the cup anyway. It felt good to hold something that belonged only to me. Later that evening, I started packing a few boxes. Not to move, but to clear space. I pulled old receipts, utility bills, bank statements, laid them out, sorted them, kept only what mattered. I wanted no mess, no confusion, no loopholes when the time came. In the bottom of a filing drawer, I found an envelope with Blake's name on it. It was a check I'd written a year ago for his driving school. It had never been cashed. Probably got tossed aside, forgotten. Like so many things from me. I tore it in half and threw it away. I wasn't angry. I was just done. That night, before I went to bed, I called Annie into the unit. I want to show you something, I said, and pulled out the documents. These papers mean the house is yours one day. She looked at them, wide-eyed. Mine? Yes, sweetheart. When I'm gone, this place will be yours, and I want you to do with it what I didn't. Use it for peace, not power. She nodded, serious beyond her years. I will. And in that moment, I believed her. It took a few days before the quiet turned into strategy. I knew the signs. Craig spending longer hours in the garage pretending to work on nothing. Lindsay avoiding eye contact while walking from car to door. Blake sulking more than usual, and no more muffins disappearing from my kitchen counter. But I didn't mind the silence. Silence is only cruel when you're still hoping for sound. I wasn't hoping anymore. I was preparing. I began with the photo albums. 30 years worth of pictures, from the dusty black and white ones of my childhood to the glossy prints of Annie's last birthday. I spread them out on the small table near the window, sorting by decade, by home, by faces that had changed. One image stopped me cold. Lindsay, at 16. Standing by the barn on our old property, wind in her hair, boots too big, grinning with her whole face. I could still remember the feel of her hand in mine that day, how she'd said, "When I grow up, I'm never leaving you behind." I placed the photo face down. People break promises when they don't think they'll be held accountable, especially to the people who've loved them most. That afternoon, I called Warren again. I asked him about something I'd never really considered before. What would it take, I asked, to revoke financial access if I had granted any? Do you mean a power of attorney? Hypothetically? Easy enough to revoke. You'd need to sign a notice and submit it. We can update everything at once if you'd like. And what about access to accounts? Cards? Beneficiary names? Same, he said. We can walk through all of it. But just to be clear, has someone misused your trust? No, I said. Not yet. He was quiet for a moment. You're preparing. I'm making sure they can't steal anything when they realize they've lost the one thing they thought was guaranteed. He exhaled, long and slow. I'll have everything ready by Thursday. After the call, I sat at my table with the window open. A wind had picked up, and the air carried the scent of dry leaves and distant smoke. It was a familiar smell. Autumn before the hard winter, memory before the forgetting. That night, I didn't sleep well. Not from worry. From clarity. I couldn't pretend anymore. I had to sort the final pieces before the storm came. In the morning, I cleaned my space. Not for guests, not for them, but for myself. For dignity. My room, my walls, my air. I opened all the windows, let the light in, washed every dish, dusted every corner. I even polished the wood frame of George's picture. You wouldn't have let it go this far, I whispered. But I did. And now I'm fixing it. Later that day, I caught Lindsay outside while she was carrying groceries in. She flinched when she saw me. Can I help? I asked. She looked suspicious. It's fine. I didn't move. I think we should talk. She closed the car door with her hip, balancing 2 bags. About what? You know what. She sighed. Mom, I really don't have time. Make time, I said, and stepped aside so she could pass. Later. Tonight. Here. She didn't answer, just kept walking. But I knew she'd come. She was too curious not to. And she did. At 8:13 p.m., Lindsay stepped into my unit, arms folded. You wanted to talk. I gestured to the seat across from mine. She didn't sit. So I started. I've changed everything, I said. Her eyebrows lifted. What does that mean? The power of attorney, bank authorizations, my will, the trust. She let out a soft laugh. You're being dramatic. No, I said. I'm being precise. She finally sat. Her face was hard, her eyes calculating. Why? You know why. I made one comment. One. I stared at her. No, Lindsay. You made 100. That one was just the one that woke me up. She looked away. You've treated me like a guest, a freeloader. An old piece of furniture that occasionally serves a purpose. But I'm not furniture, and I'm not your tenant. This is my house, she said, her voice rising. No, I said calmly. It's mine, and soon it'll be Annie's. Her head snapped toward me. What? I've put it in a trust. She'll inherit it, not you. That's insane. No, I said. It's mine to give. And I'm giving it to the only one in this family who still looks me in the eye without asking for something. Lindsay stood abruptly. You're destroying everything. No, I said. I'm restoring something. Myself. She opened her mouth, closed it, then left. No slamming door, no final words, just the sound of retreat. And in that sound, I finally exhaled. Let her spin. I was done spinning for her. It wasn't until the next day that Blake came to see me. He hadn't set foot in my unit for months, even when he borrowed things, chargers, headphones, a spare umbrella. He sent Annie to get them, or just took them without asking. But that morning, he showed up at my door, hands in his pockets, expression like someone had dared him to be polite. Hey, he said, like it was a chore. I stood in the doorway. Hello, Blake? He didn't ask to come in, didn't apologize. Just looked past me like something more interesting might be happening inside. Mom said you're changing stuff. That's right. She's pretty mad. I nodded. I imagine she is. He shifted his weight. So, like, are we gonna have to move or something? That was it. No, how are you? No, what happened? Just, what does this mean for me? I studied him. 16, going on 30 when it suited him. Tall, smart, quick-tongued when he wanted to be. But all surface. Not a flicker of depth. No, I said. You're not going to have to move. Not unless your parents make choices that leave you no other option. He frowned. That doesn't make sense. I leaned in slightly. It will when you're older. When you've built something with your own hands and watched people take it for granted. He looked away. After a pause, he muttered, Annie said you gave her the house. I did. But she's just a kid. Yes, I said. And yet she's never once treated me like I was disposable. He rolled his eyes, turned, and walked away without another word. I didn't stop him. There was nothing left to say. That afternoon I made soup. Real soup. The kind that starts with bones and hours of slow simmering. The smell filled the unit and drifted out through the open windows. A few years ago, that smell would have brought the whole house knocking. Now, it brought only Annie. She arrived barefoot, as always, holding a crumpled piece of paper. I made you something, she said, handing it to me. It was a drawing of the two of us sitting under the maple tree, her head on my shoulder, our teacups balanced on a low branch. I like it when you're happy, she said simply. I didn't trust my voice, so I pulled her close and kissed the top of her head. Would you like to help me write a letter? I asked. To who? To me, I said. For later. She nodded, as if that made perfect sense. We sat together at the table, and I told her what to write. Dear Grandma, if you're reading this, you probably needed a reminder. You are kind. You are brave. You are not small, even when they try to make you feel that way. Thank you for loving me like a warm quilt. I will never fold you up and put you away. Love, Annie. I folded the letter and placed it in the cedar box with George's. Now I had two. That evening, I saw Craig pacing the yard on his phone. Angry. His voice carried. No, we can't use that account anymore. She shut it down. Yes, I'm serious. The bank said she revoked everything. I smiled, just barely. They were scrambling. They'd built a structure on the assumption that I'd always carry the weight. And now that I'd stepped aside, the whole thing tilted. Let them find their balance. It was time I found mine. The next morning, Lindsay didn't speak to me. Neither did Blake. Craig tried to make conversation, some weak remark about the weather. But I answered with a nod and closed the door behind me. But Annie came in that evening with a folded blanket, a bottle of hand lotion, and a Hershey bar. I thought you might like a treat. I do, I said, smiling. We didn't talk much that night, just sat together while the sky darkened and the quiet settled around us like an old friend. For years I had thought that peace came from keeping the peace. But now I knew better. Peace comes from truth. And I had finally told mine. The days grew colder after that. Not just outside, though winter was creeping in fast with its brittle wind and silver mornings, but inside the main house too. The lights stayed off longer, conversations grew shorter, and the air between me and Lindsay turned dense with everything unsaid. She passed me once on the path to her car, keys in one hand, a scarf wound tight around her throat. You've created a mess, she muttered, not even slowing down. I didn't respond. Let her think it was a mess. To me, it felt like clearing a table that had been cluttered for years. A week later, the bank mailed me confirmation. All automatic withdrawals linked to my accounts under Craig's or Lindsay's names had been canceled. 17 in total. Gym memberships, car insurance, even a subscription for organic pet food. I didn't even know they had a dog. I stacked the papers neatly in my desk drawer. Then I opened my checkbook and wrote out one last check for Annie's savings account. Not a huge sum, but a beginning. Something she could build on later when she had her own choices to make. That night, I cooked dinner for myself, roasted vegetables, a bit of salmon. Nothing fancy, but I set the table properly. Cloth napkin, real plate, candle lit. I played a record, the kind George used to love, with the scratchy old jazz that made you feel like you were living in sepia tones. And I ate slowly, alone, at peace. The next morning brought a knock. I opened the door expecting Annie, but found someone else. Daniel, my neighbor from down the street, retired fireman, knees shot to hell, kind eyes. We used to talk more, back when George was alive. He'd helped install the railing outside my porch, and I used to bake him rhubarb pie. He held a box in both hands. "Brought you some firewood," he said. "Figured you might need it." I stepped aside. "You didn't have to." He shrugged. "Didn't feel like sitting at home pretending to watch TV." I made coffee. He drank it black. We sat on the porch, wrapped in quilts, watching the street. "You're stirring things up over there," he said after a while. I smiled. "You hear it through the hedges?" "No. But I see the way they move, avoiding your door like it bites." We laughed. Then he grew quiet. "Good for you, though," he said. "Most folks your age, they just give in. Let the next generation bulldoze them." "I did," I said. "For years. And now? Now I remember who I am." He nodded, like that made perfect sense. Hell of a thing, remembering. Later that day, I walked to the mailbox. A thick envelope waited inside. Legal documents from Warren, final versions of everything we'd discussed. I brought them in, laid them out, signed the last remaining lines, and placed the return envelope on the counter. It was done. Fully, formally, irrevocably done. That evening, I got a call from Lindsay. I almost didn't answer, but something in me said, "Not yet. You still have more truth to walk through." So I picked up. "I need to know what you told Annie," she said immediately. "Excuse me?" "She keeps talking about staying with you, about this house, about inheritance. It's putting things in her head." I sat down. "I didn't put anything in her head," I said. "I gave her facts. It's up to you whether you want to keep hiding from them. She's a child. She's more respectful than anyone else in that house." There was a long pause. Then Lindsay said, quieter, "You're turning her against us." "No," I said. "You're doing that. I'm just not lying about who's who anymore." She hung up. No goodbye. No resolution. I didn't expect one. That night, Annie came over and helped me stack the firewood Daniel brought. Her cheeks were pink from the cold, her hair pulled back in a messy braid. We worked in silence until she asked, "Are you scared?" "Of what?" "That they'll stop talking to you." I looked at her. "Sweetheart, they stopped talking to me a long time ago. What they were doing wasn't talking, it was taking." She nodded. And in the quiet afterward, I realized something else. I wasn't afraid of losing them, because I had already found myself. I didn't plan to confront them that day. I'd imagined something quieter, later. Maybe a letter, maybe nothing at all. Just a gradual fade into the kind of distance they thought I already lived in. But some things don't wait for timing. Some truths kick down the door. It started with the pounding, not knocking, pounding. The kind that rattles the frame and makes your hands freeze mid-motion. I was in the middle of folding laundry when it started. I opened the door to Craig, his face red, his breathing shallow. "I need to talk to you," he barked. "Now." I didn't move. "Is this how we knock now?" He ignored the question. "Do you know what you've done? We got a notice from the bank. The mortgage payment bounced, the car insurance, half the utilities. You assumed I'd pay them. That's not the same as asking." He stepped forward, and I raised a hand, firm and steady. "Craig, you're not welcome to shout in my doorway." His nostrils flared, but he didn't cross the line. Good. Some part of him still recognized a boundary when it was drawn hard enough. "You've destabilized our entire household," he snapped. "You've taken away our financial structure." "I wasn't part of your financial structure," I said coldly. "I was your backup plan, your silent investor, your unpaid maid, and now I'm not." He ran a hand through his hair. "What are we supposed to do?" "You're grown. Figure it out." He stared at me like I'd slapped him. Then came Lindsay. She was behind him, arms crossed, coat thrown over her pajamas, lips drawn tight, like she was holding in a scream. "Mom," she said. "Enough." I tilted my head. "Enough of what?" "This theater, this power play." I laughed, quiet, bitter. "Is that what you think this is? A show?" "I think you're punishing us because you're lonely." "No, Lindsay," I said softly. "I'm punishing myself for not speaking sooner." Her face tightened. "This isn't fair," she said. "We made room for you. We changed our lives for you." "You made space in the backyard," I said. "You didn't make room in your lives." "We housed you." I stepped out then, fully, into the space between us. "No, you lived on property I bought, with a mortgage I paid. You raised your children in a house that wasn't yours, with bills you didn't cover, with dinners you expected me to cook, with favors you never acknowledged." The words hung in the cold air. "I didn't ask for a palace," I continued. "I didn't ask for applause. I asked for respect. And when that disappeared, I reclaimed what was mine." Blake appeared at the edge of the porch, earbuds hanging from one ear, phone still glowing in his hand. "Is this like a family fight?" he asked, bored. "Go back inside," Lindsay snapped. He shrugged and walked away. Lindsay turned back to me. "You're destroying this family over a technicality." "A technicality?" I repeated. "You mean legal ownership? Or decades of unspoken labor? Or the fact that I fed this household while you pretended I was a tenant?" She opened her mouth, but I kept going. "Do you know what you said to me, the night this started?" She blinked. "You told me I eat too much for someone who doesn't pay rent. And you said it in front of your children, as if I were an embarrassment you were too polite to evict. I didn't mean it like that." "But you said it like that." Craig stepped in again, voice low. "We didn't realize you were keeping score." "I wasn't," I said, "until I realized no one else even thought the game had rules." They both stood there, small in their indignation, caught not in lies, but in a truth they never expected me to speak aloud. I looked at Lindsay one last time. "You wanted me invisible," I said. "Now I am. And suddenly, you see me." Then I turned, walked back inside, and closed the door behind me. Not slammed, just shut. Firm. Certain. And the silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was earned. By the time I boiled the kettle that night, I knew I wouldn't sleep. Not from regret. That part of me had been chipped away slowly over the last few months, and now there wasn't enough left to stir at night. What I felt wasn't sadness, either. It was something else. Like standing at the edge of a cliff and realizing the ground under you was finally solid. The storm had come. I'd stood in the center of it, and I was still here. The next morning, I started packing. Not to leave, not yet, but to prepare. There's a kind of strength in making decisions out loud with your hands, sorting what stays and what goes, touching things that once mattered, photos, old scarves, greeting cards, and choosing, on your own terms, which pieces of the past come forward with you. I packed slowly, deliberately, one box at a time, labeled each carefully. Annie came by around noon. She didn't ask why I had tape on the table and empty boxes by the couch. She just walked in, set down her little backpack, and said, "Want help?" We worked side by side. I showed her how to wrap fragile things in towels, how to fold sweaters so they didn't crease. She handled everything with care, even when she didn't know what it was. She asked about a photo of George and me in our 20s, standing in front of a tractor. "Grandpa was handsome," she said, squinting at it. "He was also loud and stubborn." "So, kind of like you?" I laughed, and it echoed through the room in a way it hadn't in months. When we finished, we sat on the porch with slices of apple and peanut butter. She told me about school, about a teacher who wore the same tie every Tuesday, and a friend who stole her markers and then gave them back without saying sorry. "I didn't forgive her," Annie said. "That's all right," I said. "Sometimes the lesson is theirs to carry, not yours." She nodded slowly, like she understood. That evening, after she'd gone back to the main house, I stood by the window and watched her bedroom light flick on, then off, then on again. She always forgot to brush her teeth before bed, and someone, probably Craig, was yelling through the hallway. It didn't make me angry. It didn't even make me sad. It made me certain. The next morning, I called a real estate agent. Not for the main house. For me. "I'm looking for something small," I told her. "Quiet. 1 bedroom, maybe 2. A porch. Some light." She asked my budget. I gave it. She asked why I was moving. I paused, then said, "Because I stayed too long in a place that stopped feeling like mine." She understood. Over the next few days, she sent me listings. I looked through each one with care, picturing what the afternoon light might feel like in the living room, how the kitchen might smell with stew on the stove, where I'd placed George's photo and the cedar box with the letters. One morning, I found it. A little bungalow on the edge of town, red shutters, a fence that needed painting, a swing on the porch that leaned slightly to the left. It looked like a beginning. I scheduled a viewing, told no one. That afternoon, I baked muffins. Not for them, for me. Blueberry, George's favorite. I set 2 aside for Annie and delivered them in a paper bag, folded neatly at the top, with a note inside. "Come sit with me after school. I have something to tell you." She came, of course. She always came. We sat by the window with our tea and our muffins, and I told her about the bungalow. "I'm not leaving you," I said. "I'm just moving to a place where I can be whole." She was quiet for a long time. Then she asked, "Can I still visit?" "Anytime you like," I said. "And when I'm older, will it be mine too?" I smiled. "No, sweetheart. This one will be mine. Just mine." She nodded. "That's fair." And somehow, it was. Later that evening, I stood alone in the kitchen and whispered to the quiet, "I'm not staying out of guilt anymore. I'm not feeding people who keep biting my hand. And I'm not waiting for permission to leave a room they never truly let me into." The real estate agent called me 3 days later. "The seller accepted your offer," she said, her voice bright through the receiver. "We'll start escrow this week. You'll have the keys by the end of the month." I thanked her, hung up, and sat for a while with the phone still in my hand, just holding it, letting the words settle in my bones. I was leaving, not in anger, not in exile, but on my own terms. I was stepping away from a place where I had shrunk to fit their comfort, where I'd been useful, but never welcome, where my silence had been mistaken for contentment. It was almost funny how easy it became once the decision was made. I kept packing, not everything, just the things that mattered. A quilt I'd sewn in my 50s, the rolling pin George gave me the year we couldn't afford a Christmas tree, Annie's drawings, my books, my records, nothing else. Lindsay didn't ask what I was doing. She must have seen the movement through the windows, but she didn't knock, didn't text, just walked past with her eyes ahead, her mouth tight. She was waiting me out, I think, waiting for the tide to pull me back. It wouldn't. The final box I packed held the cedar chest with George's letters and Annie's note. I wrapped it in a towel and placed it gently on top. That was my inheritance. Not money, not property. Words. Truths. The quiet proof that I had lived and been loved, not always kindly, but deeply. That Sunday, Annie helped me clean the windows. She did it without being asked. "I want your new place to shine," she said, wiping a corner with the edge of her sleeve. "First impressions matter." She made a checklist on her notepad. Windows, shelves, floors, fridge. She added sparkles next to each item once we finished. She was the only one who knew I was leaving. The only one I told. Not because I wanted it to be a secret, but because I didn't owe them a show. That evening, while I was folding sheets, I heard voices outside, raised ones, Craig's and Lindsay's. The back door slammed. Feet stomped across the gravel. I didn't move. I didn't peek through the blinds. I let the storm pass without opening a single window. Later, I found a note under my door. "You've made your point, but this is still our home." No name, no greeting, just those words, as if the house itself had sent them. I folded it once, twice, and dropped it in the trash. That night, I stood in my doorway and looked at the path between my unit and the main house. The garden lights flickered, barely working. The grass was patchy, damp. I'd once planted tulips along that path. Lindsay had forgotten to water them. I wouldn't plant anything else here. The next morning, I woke early. I dressed with care, blue cardigan, wool slacks, my grandmother's brooch pinned to my collar. I made tea, buttered toast, and ate it while the light crept through the curtains. Then I walked to the front door of the main house and knocked. Lindsay opened it, surprised. She didn't say anything, just stepped back. Craig was in the kitchen, arms crossed, pretending not to listen. I stood in the entryway. I didn't sit. "I'm leaving," I said. Lindsay blinked. "What do you mean?" "I bought a house," I said. "I'll move in by the end of the month. Annie knows. No one else needs to." She swallowed. "So you're just abandoning the family?" "I'm removing myself from a place that treated me like a burden." She said nothing. I looked at Craig. "You'll need to refinance the house or move. It'll be yours again, on paper and in cost. You've had time to prepare." Still silence. "I don't want arguments. I'm not looking for closure. This is just a courtesy." Lindsay finally spoke. "What about Annie?" "She'll visit. She's a child. She's the only one who treated me like a person." I turned to go. "Mom?" Lindsay called after me. I paused. She didn't finish the sentence. So I left. And this time, I didn't look back. The house was smaller than I remembered from the photos, but in the best way. It didn't echo. It didn't swallow sound. It didn't feel like a space I'd been pushed into or tolerated within. It felt held, like I'd been scooped out of something hollow and placed into something solid. The front steps creaked, but they held. The door stuck a little in the corner, but I didn't mind. I liked things with character, things that resisted just enough to remind you they existed. The keys turned without protest. That was how it began. The woman who sold it to me left a potted lavender plant by the sink and a folded note on the counter. May your new season be soft. Soft. After everything, I didn't know if softness was possible, but I was willing to try. I moved the boxes in myself, slowly, one by one, a few each day. Daniel helped with the heavier ones. Annie came on the weekends. She brought her sketch pad and sat in the empty living room, legs crossed, drawing my walls like they were sacred. "This place feels honest," she said once. It did. The fireplace worked. The windows opened all the way. The street was quiet, except for birds and the occasional dog. There were neighbors, but not too many. There was space. There was time. There was me. I arranged the furniture the way I liked it. No compromise. No, well, the kids need room for this, or Craig prefers that. Just comfort. Just calm. I hung George's picture in the hallway, and beside it, for the first time, I hung one of Annie's drawings, the one with the maple tree and our teacups balanced on a branch. She cried when she saw it framed. "You really kept it?" "I kept everything," I told her. "You just couldn't see it before." We had cocoa that day on the back steps. No one interrupted us. No one watched us like we were a puzzle to solve or a warning to heed. We just sat. Together. She asked if she could spend her spring break with me. I said yes before she finished the sentence. I never asked Lindsay for permission, and Lindsay never called. Not after I left. Not once. No angry texts. No guilt-laced voicemails. No sarcastic comments. Just silence. I wondered what story she was telling herself now. That I abandoned them. That I overreacted. That I was punishing her. That I was unstable, ungrateful, unsound. Let her. Let her rewrite me in the version of events that let her sleep at night. I had no interest in correcting her anymore. The truth didn't need her endorsement. Weeks passed. Then one day, Annie showed up with a package. Small, wrapped in plain brown paper. "From Mom," she said, eyes cautious. I didn't open it right away. We made tea first, played a game of cards, talked about her art class. Then, when the sun was low, I untied the string and unfolded the paper. Inside was a photograph. Me, Lindsay, George, and baby Blake. Taken on the porch of our first home. Back when none of us knew what was coming. Back when love was loud and clumsy and trying its best. On the back, Lindsay had written 3 words. I do remember. That was all. No apology, no explanation. Just a memory returned. I didn't cry. I placed the photo in the drawer with the letters. And that night, I slept soundly. Not because everything was healed, but because I finally knew where I ended and they began. Spring came quiet and slow. The tree outside my new window bloomed pale pink, the petals soft and foolish in how easily they trusted the weather. But they were right to trust. The frost didn't return that year. The cold stayed gone. I found myself breathing differently. Not deeper, not louder, just less carefully, as if I'd stopped holding my breath in someone else's home. Annie visited most weekends. Sometimes she stayed overnight. Sometimes she just came to sit on the porch and draw. She knew how to be still with someone. That's rare in a child. Rare in an adult, too, if we're honest. She never asked about her mother. Not until that Sunday. We were weeding the small garden I'd started out back. Just tomatoes, a few herbs, nothing ambitious. The soil was soft, a little too wet from the rain earlier that week. "Do you think Mom hates you now?" she asked, not looking up from the dirt. "No," I said, "but she doesn't talk to you." "Talking and loving aren't always the same thing." She nodded, thinking. "So, do you still love her?" I sat back on my heels, wiped my hands on my apron. "Yes," I said, "but from far away." She didn't ask what that meant. I think she already knew. We finished the garden in silence. Then we made soup and ate it by the window, and she drew a picture of the pink blossomed tree outside. She titled it, "Still Here." That night, after she left, I lit a candle and sat at the table with George's picture. "You were right," I said. "I didn't owe them my silence." The phone rang once that week. Just once. It was Blake. His voice was lower than I remembered. He asked how I was, said school was hard, that he might want to visit sometime. I said he could. I didn't ask why. He didn't apologize. I didn't expect him to. It was enough that he dialed my number with no hand pushing him to do it. The next day, I got a letter from Warren. Just a routine follow-up. Confirmation of the deed transfer, the updated trust for Annie, a final breakdown of my accounts. I read through everything slowly. Then I burned the copies I no longer needed. Let the old versions turn to ash. Let the space they took in my life make room for quiet. The following weekend, Daniel came by. He brought a pie and a story about his grandson nearly setting the garage on fire with a drone. We sat on the porch swing that still leaned slightly left. "I heard from someone," he said, "that your daughter was at the church social." "Good for her," I said. "She didn't mention you." "She never did when I was 5 feet from her. Why would she now?" He chuckled. "You're sharp." "I'm honest." He raised his coffee mug. "To that." We toasted with weak coffee and old hands. That evening, I took out the photo Lindsay had sent. I placed it in a new frame. I didn't put it beside George. I didn't put it on the wall. I kept it in the drawer. Some things you honor quietly. Some things you let rest, without trying to resurrect them. Later, when the wind picked up and the sky turned that strange springtime blue-gray, I sat in the living room, wrapped in a blanket Annie had knit me with mismatched yarn. I looked around. Every object in that room had a reason to be there. Every photo, every cup, every blanket. There was nothing I kept because I had to. Nothing I left out of guilt. It was the first home I'd ever built entirely for myself, and it was enough. I didn't mark the anniversary with flowers or candles. No visits to the old house. No messages sent. No long looks backward. Just a walk. Down a quiet street where the magnolias had opened too early. Past the bakery with the chalkboard sign that always spelled something wrong. Along the fence of the elementary school, where Annie once pointed out the spot where she scraped her knee and didn't cry. 1 year since I moved into my own home. And still, every morning, I woke up surprised by how light my chest felt. It wasn't joy, not exactly. It was more like clarity, like I'd stepped out of a room filled with noise and could finally hear my own footsteps again. That day, I baked. The good kind, too, not the fast kind. Lemon cake with poppy seeds. Warm butter folded into sugar until the bowl felt heavy with sweetness. I set out 2 plates. One for me, one for Annie. She came after school as she always did. Taller now. Quieter, too. Her face had thinned out just a little, the way girls' faces do before they grow into themselves. But her eyes hadn't changed. Still saw everything. Still softened when she looked at me. We ate slowly. Talked about her science project, about a boy who liked her, and how she didn't like him back, about how the art teacher had picked her painting for the spring showcase. "Will you come?" she asked. "If I'm invited." She rolled her eyes. "You're always invited." Later, as we washed the dishes, she said it, without ceremony, without warning. "Mom talks about you more now." I didn't turn around. "Oh?" "She says she handled things badly, that you were more generous than she knew." I rinsed a cup. "That's progress." "She doesn't know how to say sorry." "I know." She paused. "She misses you." I dried my hands, then turned and kissed the top of her head. "I'm still here," I said, "just not where she left me." That night, after Annie went home, I pulled out the letter she wrote me last year. The one that began, "Dear Grandma, if you're reading this, you probably needed a reminder." I didn't need a reminder. But I read it anyway. And then I added a new one. "Dear Annie, one day you'll stand where I stood. Maybe not literally, maybe not in a backyard apartment or a mortgage dispute. But you'll stand at the edge of something. Love that's gone cold, family that forgot your worth, a silence you kept too long. And you'll have to decide, stay small or speak. When that day comes, I hope you remember me. Not because I was perfect, but because I stopped pretending I had nothing left to claim. You are not too much. You are not invisible. You are not asking for too much when you ask to be treated like you matter. And when it's your turn to leave the room, do it with your head up. Do it even if no one claps. Grandma." I folded the letter and placed it in the cedar box with the others. That box, my little archive of bravery. Later, I opened the windows and let the spring air move through the house. It smelled like citrus and wind, like beginnings. Someone once told me that dignity is quiet. They were right. I didn't shout. I didn't slam doors. I didn't make scenes. I just walked out. And I stayed out. That was my victory. If this story sat heavy in your chest, if it reminded you of something you've lived or something you've swallowed, don't leave quietly. Speak. Act. Move. And when you do, write your own ending. Then fold it gently and pass it on.